notes, even as attorneys for media organizations mentioned some of her interviews, which have, revealed certain details regarding the ongoing investigation, or at least the former president's account of what has happened so far. But she did not approach the bench, and no one on that team filed a motion in this case. We should point out, however, separately, the former president's legal team has filed a civil suit under a different judge to try to limit the Justice Department's review of records seized by the FBI during that search. The judge in that case has asked for clarity on exactly what the former president's legal team is asking, the precise relief that's been sought, why the federal court in Florida should have jurisdiction there, whether or not the team is seeking immediate relief. Now, former President Trump's legal team has until tomorrow to sort of provide some of those answers to the court. So we should know more on that front in the coming hours as well. Certainly a busy week on both the criminal and civil suit connected to this search of the former president's Mar-a-Lago estate.
We want to also bring in now CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. Jessica, thanks for joining us. Nicole, please do stay with us. Jessica, just very simply, what's the significance of the judge's decision?
I'm a lawyer, so I wish I could give you a simple answer, but the answer is we don't know. We're going to see a lot, or my guess is not that much. So what the magistrate judge here has said is, okay, there's some part of this affidavit that can become public, as you've been hearing about. But the judge also agreed that a whole bunch of information can remain private. We're talking about witness information. We're talking about the investigation, the basically roadmap to the investigation, any national security issues. And so it kind of comes down to the same issue that we've been talking about for about a week now, which is, are we going to see this affidavit, but it's going to be basically a black piece of paper with a few words unredacted, like and, the, etc. Now, the judge has said previously, if there's so little that can be unredacted that it's either confusing or misleading or pointless, that he would reserve the right potentially to not provide that to the public. So my sense is there's something there, but I don't know that we're going to learn an enormous amount more than what's in the search warrant itself. One other thing to remember is that this can be appealed to the Chief Justice in the district in Florida. And so this may not even be the final ruling on this kind of separate issue of what part of the affidavit do we see at all.
Jessica, I want to go ahead and show our viewers, if we have it, a little bit from the judge's order itself, in which Judge Bruce Reinhart says, I find that the government has met its burden of showing a compelling reason or good cause to seal portions of the affidavit. And the judge goes on to describe that. But Jessica, based on what we know, and I know you're just getting a chance to look through this order as well, what would some of those reasons be for sealing portions of this?
So I'm going to look to the side to my notes for a minute, but the reasons would basically be fears of witness security, the identity of the witness. That is a legitimate reason to go to a judge and say, don't unseal the names and identities of the people who are helping us with this investigation. It threatens the investigation. It threatens their safety. Same thing with respect to the identity of law enforcement agents. It could threaten their security. And we've seen this play out. We've seen there be threats against this judge and what we think are the FBI agents who actually executed the search warrants. With respect to the identity of the identity of uncharged parties. Same thing. It could blow open the investigation. It could tell the public and everybody else more than the Department of Justice wants to at this moment. What are other reasons here? The investigation strategy, direction, scope, the sources, all of that could threaten not just the Department of Justice's really plan here for how they're going to proceed with the investigation, but people's safety and potentially, because we're talking about classified and or top secret documents here, potentially national security as well. All of those are good reasons for a judge to say, okay, this information can remain redacted.
Jessica, you're a lawyer. I'm just curious what your own opinion is. Are you surprised by the judge's order?
So I will say that I was actually surprised by the previous order last week that the Department of Justice had to come back and explain exactly which portions of the affidavit had to be redacted and why. I was surprised, and I wish I could say otherwise, but that when the Department of Justice came last week to this magistrate judge and said, we can't make this information public. It's national security, it's witness security, and it's the investigation itself. I was surprised that the magistrate judge said, no, there's portions of this that can be public. Basically, I'm erring on the side of transparency. Come back and prove it to me. That's exactly what's happened right now. Based on what we know and based on what the judge said, this is not surprising. He said some of this can be public. Come back to me with the redactions that you need. The Department of Justice did that. He, in very quick order, said, it sounds like, okay, I agree with you. This part will become public tomorrow, again, if there's not an immediate appeal. So the rest of what happened after last week is all pretty predictable.
All right, for our viewers just joining us, it is now 4 o'clock on the East Coast. We are continuing our coverage of breaking news. Federal Judge Bruce Reinhart in Florida has ordered a redacted version of the Mar-a-Lago search affidavit to be released tomorrow. That is expected by noon Eastern time on Friday. We have been talking to both our Jessica Levinson as well as our Nicole Skanga, who is in Mar-a-Lago, is in Florida, covering this. And Nicole, as we go through this document here, what is it that we are likely to see? Jessica mentioned the potential for an appeal at some point. It's still very early. This news is just coming through. But any signals at this point that that might, in fact, happen, that there might be an appeal or anything of the sort in the works?
Well, whether or not there is appeal remains to be seen, Elaine, but we do know that affidavits in general contain detailed factual basis for search warrants that are executed. And so we are looking for any details regarding what has been referred to as an unprecedented, though authorized search of a former president's estate. And in this case, even if the heavily redacted or partially redacted document comes back and, as Jessica mentioned, is largely blacked out, if it looks like Swiss cheese, in the judge's words, if it's meaningless gibberish, we still should be able to see how many pages it is. And we have heard, many on the side of former President Trump arguing that this was a hastily put together search or that this happened quickly. Perhaps even the number of pages in this affidavit could give us some clues as to whether or not that is true. If it's dozens of pages, if it contains, lots of evidence, if we can see it all a timeline of when the investigation began and how this pieced together. So although it is quite possible that given what the judge has acknowledged about blacking out, for instance, identities of witnesses, law enforcement agents, uncharged parties, leaving out information about the investigative roadmap or strategy, the direction, the scope. We know grand jury information that is protected by federal rule of criminal procedure will not be included in this. But even still, it seems that there will be some information regarding the reason as to why FBI was authorized to enter into the former president's home in this key document. And it has been something that media organizations, over a dozen of them, including CBS News, have been pushing for, since the start of this case.
And as I'm speaking with you, we were just seeing President Trump there for a moment. Nicole, just for our viewers who maybe are just joining us, just to, and who may have been not following this every day, remind all of us sort of how we got to this point. Tell us again, summarize the investigation going on at Mar-a-Lago and the debate over what would happen with this affidavit. We may have lost Nicole. Nicole, are you still with us? We may have lost Nicole.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
We hear you now.
Okay. The Justice Department Thursday proposed these redactions today to the affidavit that was used to obtain a search warrant for the former president's Florida residence. And, these redactions were made in an effort to shield witnesses, perhaps from intimidation or retribution. Just all of this being said, this involves the ongoing investigation into the former president and whether or not the former president took classified records from the White House to his Florida residence following his administration. And so, we know that this affidavit could provide important, potentially revelatory details about the government's justification for taking what was quite an extraordinary step of entering into the Mar-a-Lago residence earlier this month on August 8th. This is an investigation that has really emerged as a sort of threat to the former president, whose legal team has offered a sort of jumbled and stumbling response at times. We spoke earlier about how there was not a large presence by the former president's legal team during the hearing last week. It also serves as this sort of interesting point for the Justice Department, for the Attorney General, to try to, really keep some of this investigation under wraps, but provide enough information to the public to defend the authorized search by federal law enforcement of the former president's home. And so it is a balancing act in many ways. The former president has also used it as leverage to fundraise for what could be, but has yet to be announced, a future, re-election bid for the presidency. And so we know that the former president raised over $1 million on 2 separate days following the FBI's authorized search for his PAC, his Political Action Committee, and that, those close to the former president feel that this is a good political moment for the president, that even though he appears to be in legal jeopardy amid several ongoing investigations, that he is in familiar territory politically, in that he is sort of posing himself or propping himself up against, federal bureaucrats. And so from the political standpoint, as it has raised questions as to whether or not it will influence the former president's decision to jump into the 2024 contest sooner rather than later.
All right, let's bring in CBS News radio correspondent Steve Dorsey joining us now as well. Steve, just want to get your thoughts on what Nicole was just talking about there, and that is sort of some of the political ramifications of what we've seen play out so far. We know we are waiting to see what, in fact, actually comes at noon on Friday, noon Eastern time, when we will see this redacted affidavit. But how has this issue played out in the political realm, especially at a time when, as Nicole points out, there has been so much speculation about whether or not the former president will actually run again in 2024?
Yeah, I think it's re-energized, certainly, supporters of former President Trump. They've used this to kind of galvanize their coalition behind him. But we've also seen some folks who are not necessarily too friendly to former President Trump take a side and at least criticize or question possible political motives that could be behind this at the FBI or the Justice Department. And those include Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, a moderate, a potential candidate for the 2024 presidential race. And we've seen others who have raised alarms that this is discrediting the independence of the Justice Department as it continues to wage, so far largely in secret, its investigation into the former president's handling or mishandling of national security records.
Stephen, just to move forward to, we've been waiting on this decision, but what is the next step in this investigation?
The next step, I think the biggest step is what, Nicole has really hit right on the head, which is the why, right? This is what we want to learn publicly. We already know the what, which is that federal authorities are investigating the former president for retention unlawfully of these classified records, of obstruction of justice in this investigation. Now we could get the roadmap, or as best as we can through this redacted document, right? We'll learn, hopefully, a little bit more about who investigators have been talking to, why they believe these alleged crimes were committed, and for how long. and perhaps the Trump legal team's cooperation over the last few months with the Justice Department and the National Archives could be detailed in this affidavit. That's the most important thing here. But either way, it's going to be weaponized by Trump and his allies as they continue to say that they're a victim of a political witch hunt.
Jessica, let me turn to you for a moment just to get some broader context on just how unusual a situation this is. Has there been a situation in the past, I'm sure there probably have been, but how common or uncommon is it to have a situation like this where you are going to have an affidavit, at least portions of which will be made public, at the same time that an ongoing Department of Justice investigation is occurring? How unusual is that?
So typically you would get this information, if at all, during the criminal trial, or at least during discovery when you've actually first charged somebody. And then there's the exchange of documents, the exchange of evidence between the parties that is required by law. I guess I would take a step back and say, let's, of course, remember that everything about this is unusual. That's why we're talking about it on television. It's unusual that you would have the FBI search the home of the former president. It's unusual that we would have an ongoing investigation surrounding activities by a former president. And so all of this is heightened both politically and legally. And then, of course, the idea that there's the affidavit here and we're kind of fighting about which portions of it become public. What I would say is it's not unusual. The law knows what to do in terms of fighting about documents and how much of those documents should be private versus public. We have law on what to do with respect to issues of national security and witness testimony and witness identification. But having it all play out in this context, I think, is what makes it so unusual. And again, we can understand that I think part of the reason that there's this push to make the information public is because we're talking about the former president of the United States, and because he has frankly put this investigation, he has in a way put this to the fore by saying it's a witch hunt. There's no basis here. And so part of the reason I think that the media organizations have said there's a compelling interest in knowing as much information as we can is because the former president has called the investigation into question. He has said this is politically motivated. He has said there's no there. And so what the media organizations argued in their motion was there's a compelling governmental interest in knowing about this investigation and knowing what the actions of former and current government officials are. So all of this is, we have legal standards, but we haven't seen it play out in this particular situation before. That is absolutely unusual.
Jessica, I want to stick with you a second. Again, in the order, the judge says, I find that the government has met its burden of showing a compelling good cause to seal portions. He lists witnesses, law enforcement agents, uncharted parties, direction, scope, methods, grand jury, indicating all of that will be redacted. So as a lawyer, we will all be looking at this affidavit tomorrow. What do you want to see? What will you be looking for? What should we be looking for that could be critical, even if, knowing so much might be blacked out?
So, I think the conversation that you just had, particularly all the things that Nicole said, are exactly right. What we're looking for is how much we're going to find out about basically what led up to that search, right? We're looking at when this started. We're looking at whether or not and how many communications there were with the Department of Justice and Trump and his attorney. We're looking at what this could tell us, frankly, about the 3 different crimes that we saw listed on the search warrant, where somebody swore, a federal law enforcement official swore under oath, there's probable cause that there's evidence of these crimes at Mar-a-Lago: obstruction of justice, the Records Act, and of course the Espionage Act. So we're looking to see, can we put some more meat on the bones of exactly what led up to this magistrate judge saying, yes, I agree with you. There's probable cause of evidence of a crime of those 3 particular statutes. And I will say, because this came so quickly, because the Department of Justice, handed in their redactions and the judge so quickly said, okay, yes, I agree with you. These things can be private, but these things can be public. it makes me think that the Department of Justice isn't actually losing that much ground. They're not having a prolonged fight about this. It looks like the judge basically accepted, and again, we're seeing this play out very quickly, but it looks like the judge basically accepted what the Department of Justice proposed. So that makes me think we're really not going to see all that much.
Steve, I want to turn back to you for just a moment. If you can describe for us how this ongoing situation and investigation and the reaction to it has impacted folks who work at the FBI, who are law enforcement agents. We know that there have been threats and heightened threats at that. Can you talk a bit about that kind of atmosphere now that law enforcement agents, particularly those federal law enforcement agents, are operating under now?
Yeah, we've heard warnings about concerns about the safety of federal investigators, federal officials, members of the FBI from the very top at the Justice Department, from Attorney General Merrick Garland, from FBI Director Christopher Wray. We've heard it from Capitol Hill, from Democrats and Republicans who say that that these threats against federal investigators, including from the departments involved in this investigation, are unfounded, are not appropriate, and they're concerned about their safety. I mean, just recently we saw a major security threat by a man apparently armed and trying to storm into the Cincinnati FBI field office, not to mention other concerns about the safety throughout the country. And this could amplify that even more. And that's something that even the Justice Department has been arguing in its effort to try to seal or try to redact at least most of this affidavit, saying it could put those federal investigators, especially if their identities are revealed, at major jeopardy of harm.
All right, Nicole, Jessica, and Steve, thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break. You're streaming CBS News.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now.
Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
You might have heard the term the Great Resignation.
That's right. It's what economists have dubbed the record-breaking number of people quitting their jobs over the last 2 years. And despite that, unemployment claims remain at a historically low point. So if workers are quitting in record numbers but not seeking unemployment, where do they all go? Errol Barnett joins us now with some answers. Hi, Errol.
Hey there, Elaine and Nikki. Great to see you both. Most of those who quit usually re-enter the workforce in a different job. But take a look at this. Only 62% of the working U.S. population is actively